This is the New Jersey Center for Nonprofits partnering with the Nonprofit Professionals of Color Collective, Tyneisha Gibbs and Vicki Fernandez, who are the co-founders of the collective. We're really delighted to have you joining us and sharing this with our constituents and our friends. Just a little bit about the center. The center is the state association for New Jersey 501c3 nonprofits. We have three primary areas that we work in. We advocate and educate the public, the nonprofits, and policymakers about issues affecting the nonprofit sector. We educate nonprofits and the public with professional training opportunities, help desk guidance. When you email us, we help you with questions and resources. We have a lot of resources that we can share with you, people with expertise in the nonprofit sector. We have some publications and research that we do. And then we also have our annual conference, which is a big event, was very successful last December. And then finally, we are a membership organization. We do have member benefits, a lot of discounts on both our education programs, priority on help desk access and services, free job postings, some exclusive networking events, and other cost-saving opportunities. The center is also a proud member of the National Council of Nonprofits. And if you look at the map, you'll see that there are state associations all over the country. We also are a network. We work together and share resources. So I just wanted to make sure you know that wherever you go in the United States, there will be a nonprofit association for you. Now, let me go back to Vicki and let's start the program.
Thanks so much, Debbie. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I feel like there should be a game we play when we share our screen, like everyone makes a sound until the person stops. I don't know. I just feel like we didn't do enough with that during the pandemic and Zoom. So you should see a colorful presentation on your screen in front of you. Does everyone see that? Awesome. So I'm going to get us started. Today, we're here to talk about the myth of the BIPOC pipeline. My name is Vicki Fernandez. My pronouns are she, her, hers. A quick visual description of myself. I'm a fat, white-skinned, mixed ethnicity, Latin heritage woman with dark, curly, piled on top of my head hair. I'm wearing a blue headband, some fun pink lipstick, and blue glasses with a green top. And I am the director, the brandy dandy new director of Driving Communities at the Grunin Foundation. I'm really excited to be a part of their team. And I'm also one of the co-founders of the Nonprofit Professionals of Color Collective. I'm going to turn it over to my partner in crime and work wife, Tyneisha Gibbs.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you so much, Vicki, and thank you to our colleagues over at the Center for New Jersey's Nonprofits. My name is Tyneisha Gibbs, like Vicki said earlier. I am the co-founder of the Nonprofit Professionals of Color Collective, as well as the founder and principal consultant of 144th and Vine, LLC. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And just a quick visual description of myself. I am a fat, light-skinned woman, African-American woman, and I am wearing a black turtleneck with a kind of cool, funky print dress over top. With curly hair with a little chignon thing here up at the top. And I'll kick it back over to Vicki.
So I'm controlling our slides today. So as Ty and I go back and forth, we'll just ask each other to advance. So you'll hear that as we go on. I'm going to talk really quickly about the collective. We are a group that started in officially January 2020. You can only imagine what it's like starting a program in January of 2020. But for us, there were some really big silver linings about the collective being online. We grew to a national and even international audience of over 800 BIPOC members, from recent college graduates all the way up to people with terminal degrees, retirees, consultants. We're a big old family of nonprofit professionals from all different parts of the sector. There's three big pieces that we provide our members. The first part is culturally competent professional development and technical assistance from a BIPOC lens. That means we're not just going to talk about fundraising. We're going to talk about what it means to fundraise as BIPOC professionals in a sector that doesn't fund BIPOC-led organizations or BIPOC development professionals the same as they do our white counterparts. The next piece is self-care, personal development, plus resources for individuals like one-on-one executive coaching. We've also done things like group therapy and individual therapy. And through all of that, we're really building a network of support. The People's Institute for Survival and Beyond always says a net that works. And I think that that's exactly what the collective does. We're a group dedicated to centering and focusing on BIPOC professionals. So while we love our white allies and colleagues and accomplices, we ask that you find other spaces to work on your anti-racist principles. We try to keep a safe space for our BIPOC members here at the collective. And we're excited to be announcing, I'm going to spill the beans. We're just left Rutgers University, and we are now under the New Jersey the Community Foundation of South Jersey is our new fiscal sponsor home. So more will be coming out about the collective in the coming years as we continue to grow and expand. Ty?
Thank you, Vicki. Yes, all very exciting. And just really quickly, some of our group norms and notes. And I'm not going to read all of these here, but I am going to go over just a few. So one main thing is what happens here stays here. What is learned here leaves here. No hoarding should go on. Whatever you find, whatever gem or tip that was shared, make sure that you share that with someone else. I'm also going to say that two truths can be held at the same time, and we must find that we respect each other and people's lived experiences. Now, this one's going to be super important, especially in this particular space where we have gathered both members of the collective, BIPOC folks, and accomplices and allies. And so there may be times where some things are shared that might be an ouchie moment. And so with that, you can just say, ooh, that's an ouchie, or just bring that to our attention in the chat. But do remember that two truths can be held at the same time. So whereas something might hurt to hear, it could still, in fact, be true. And lastly, I just want to lift up that we are encouraging folks to share space and take up space, but also to make sure that you land the plane. So when we open things up for folks to be able to share and to talk with each other and to network in this space, that you do that, but that you focus on the relationship building instead of solicitations. And also, please utilize the parking lot, which is the chat. Ask questions and DM Debbie if needed. We hope that you've been able to download the handout. I'm going to drop the link in the chat one more time for that handout. That's dropped in there. If you are not able to, it is a fillable document, but if you're not able to fill it in, maybe you don't have whatever version of Adobe that gives you that authorization, then feel free to go old school and grab a pen and paper and make sure that you're following along with us. And I'm going to kick it back over to Vicki.
No, you're not. You're taking this one too. Sorry. Yeah, this is you again.
Absolutely, absolutely. So, state of the sector, where are we? We've heard so many things in terms of where the nonprofit sector is, and we've had a lot of great white papers that have been produced. One thing that actually led to this work and us creating this group was the Race to Lead survey that initially came out. I know right now they're doing a new iteration of it, but the original findings really compelled us to be able to build this collective and to be able to assist our folks, not only in the sector, but also through the executive pipeline. And we also have here a downloadable, clickable link to the center's report as well for the New Jersey Nonprofit Diversity Report. And I believe that link is going to be dropped in the chat as well. But we just want to highlight some of the things that came out of that report. And so one of those is 1 out of 5 executives are people of color. So if you look at your organization and you look at who are all in the executive suite or the C-suite, if you will, it's basically stating that only 1 out of 5 of them. So let's say you have 5 folks, there's probably just that one. If you have more than that, that means that your organization is an exception. 28% of nonprofit staff identify as BIPOC folks, but what we found is that that number is a lot higher once you get down to direct service professionals and mid-level managers. And 10% of BIPOC executives don't primarily serve communities of color. So what does that mean? In terms of like the actual communities of color organizations or organizations that do serve primarily communities of color, 9 times out of 10, they are led by non-BIPOC executives. And that's not necessarily a bad thing. That's not what we're saying. But we are saying that BIPOC folks oftentimes are not getting an opportunity to lead in the communities in which they serve.
So one of the very nerdy Canva things that I discovered is that we are going to be able to share this presentation with you at the end of today as a website, as just a simple link, and you'll be able to click on everything that's linked here. So all the articles that we'll discuss are also going to be included in here for you. So what tales have you heard in this sector? What are the myths you've heard about BIPOC professionals? Drop those in the chat for us. And let's see if we have some common themes. Let's just take like 30 seconds. Go. Let's see who the fast typers are. There are not enough. Okay, so Craig, thank you. Not enough. I'm going to guess we're talking not enough BIPOC people. They don't exist. Tyneisha, you are a magical unicorn. Apparently, you don't exist. But yes, thank you. That is totally something we hear. Far between. Hard to find diverse individuals to serve on a board. Undereducated, yes. Too aggressive. Not educated enough, loud.
That aggressive one, I've heard that personally.
Ooh, yeah, because you're Black, Latinx, Asian, you have all the answers to the questions, especially about questions about your people, because anything else you might not know about, but the questions about your people aren't given the leadership opportunities. All right, so I'm hearing good ones here. Clearly, everyone's ready to listen because you've heard these stories before.
And so I'm just going to jump in before we go forward. I'm just going to jump in really quickly. And so some of the things that you all shared, some of are actually things that we've heard as well. And so persons of color are also underrepresented in the board space as well. And when compared with the overall makeup of staff in the surveyed organizations, 4/5 or 79% of chief executives in the organizations surveyed were white, compared with 64% of staff overall. And with the surveyed organizations also reported that 79% of their board members were white. Whites comprised 79% of the chief executives, 71% of deputy directors, and 82% of chief financial officers as well. And the proportion of chief executives of color is markedly higher in those organizations. So kick it back to Vicki.
Thanks. the stories that you've heard, these anecdotes, and the statistics that Tyneisha shared, we know that there's work that needs to be done, but I'm going to give you a big spoiler alert. And if you were looking for a magic bean today, there are no magic beans in our presentation. It's really going to be about planting seeds, sowing gardens, and doing the work. As we go through the presentations this morning, because we also try to have some fun while we do our work, you'll see little references to fairy tales. And so if you can figure out what the fairy tale is that I'm referencing as we go through each myth, the metaphor there, drop it in the chat and let's see who could guess those first. So Andrea's kicking it off. Jack and the Beanstalk. There are no magic beans, Jack. We're going to have to do some work together. I'm going to go ahead and share with you the 5 pipeline myths that we're really going to explore today. And some of these are the ones that you've already mentioned in the chat. There aren't any qualified BIPOC candidates. We post our job listings everywhere. Our office is welcoming of all people. Ellipsis, but all the BIPOC people seem to leave really quickly. We'll get to that. My hands are tied. I'm an ally. I get it. After each one of these myths that we discuss, we'll invite you to go to the handout and answer the questions under the prompt for that myth. At the end, we're going to do a group breakout where we'll talk a little bit more about your answers, but obviously this is for you, so be honest with yourselves. And when you're talking later in a group, if you're uncomfortable sharing something too personal, you could always say pass. So put it out on paper. You could edit yourself later. The first myth we hear is that there aren't any qualified BIPOC candidates. But the reality is that we need to check our opportunities against a lens of access, inclusion, and anti-racism. A good friend of mine is working for a law firm right now, and he's been charged with bringing in more diverse candidates to the law firm. But his company will only hire from the top Ivy League universities. We know that Ivy League universities are not doing much better than we are as a sector when it comes to diversity, equity, and inclusion. So instead of thinking more broadly, they've created this narrow space that they want to select from, a narrow space that has historically excluded many people of color. Now, there is a reality to this that I want to mention, but it gets focused on way too much. We heard from someone when we did this presentation once before that only 5% of mental health professionals with her particular type of qualification are BIPOC. And so to that we say, how are we thinking more broadly beyond just certifications as we're bringing people through the pipeline? Are there opportunities in action for us to be flexible? Are there things that we can do to support leaders, possibly hiring someone and supporting them through their certification? Are there opportunities to help someone who's in the middle of a program and create some flexibility with their role so that they have the space to continue their studies? What are these requirements that exist behind the barriers that BIPOC people and other historically excluded groups, where can we change these things? Where are we putting up barriers that don't need to exist? The second part of this myth is that we often hear about the undereducation of BIPOC professionals. In the case of that particular qualification, only 5% of people having it in the field being BIPOC. But what we find really is that it's not about education, it's about opportunity and access. So this came from a report. Even Black workers with a college degree are more likely to be underemployed than similarly, I'm going to struggle with that word today, educated white coworkers. When they are employed, Black workers with a college or advanced degree are more likely than their white counterparts to be underemployed when it comes to their skill level. And that's linked here, an article from Economic Policy Institute. We need to make sure that all people in our organization are given opportunities to build experience towards their professional goals, even if it sometimes falls outside of their title. We need to create more pathways for opportunities and access. The last point about this myth that I want to discuss is that so often organizations are clamoring. We have 92 people on this call today. They're desperate for this information. They want to diversify, but they're not crediting the BIPOC leaders coming into their interview processes for the lived experience that they bring to the table. This is practically a commodity, but instead it just gets tokenized or exploited and not valued and appreciated for what it is. I want more organizations to think about how we can compensate BIPOC people for their lived experience, knowledge, and expertise and pay them for this knowledge. This is not about lowering requirements. Is it lowering requirements when you hire white folks to serve BIPOC communities when they don't have an intimate knowledge or experience of living as a BIPOC person? No. We need to start crediting folks for the work that they're doing in the community. And this also applies to board seats as well. If you want to bring on more diverse candidates, but you're still expecting them to do all the things that the white colleagues are doing, when the white colleagues aren't bringing to the table what some of these more diverse candidates are bringing, we have to question what's really the issue here. I'm going to set a timer for 2 minutes, and I'm going to encourage everyone to open up the link to the handout and look at the prompts for question number 1, for myth number 1. So the timer's going, you have 2 minutes, jot down a few notes. Wrapping up the last few seconds. I'll pass it over to Tyneisha.
You know, I'm loving this
Little countdown timer.
little countdown timer. All right. So the next myth is we post our job listings everywhere. And really quickly in the chat, does anyone recognize what this fairy tale is? If you recognize it, please drop it in the chat box. Let's see, any takers? Snow White, close, Tyneisha. Cinderella, yes, Cinderella. That is the myth. Cinderella, Cinderella. All right, so myth 2, we post our job listings everywhere. We hear that all the time. And the reality is there's opportunity hoarding that's happening because we are hiring from within our own networks. And sometimes that benefits us. I know that it benefited me personally at my 9 to 5. However, it is not benefiting us as a sector from hiring within our own networks. We have to make sure that we are reaching out to different organizations in order to post, but also, especially when we are hiring for C-suite level positions, that we are hiring executive search firms that are BIPOC led or diverse. And some of the things that need to happen when we do this is that we're supporting the time and the cost of outreach and not just when we are doing the hiring, right? So there are different communities and different professional associations as an organization and as a staff. We can work with affinity groups or other ERGs in order to post the jobs that we're hiring for. And also we can pay for that listing to be shared. I know oftentimes working in nonprofit, because I've worked in the sector my entire life, we do not invest in our hiring process. We kind of cringe at having to pay for the paid option on Indeed or these other opportunities. But as we all know, those costs of, the revolving door of having to hire someone and going through the process of training them, and then going through the process of onboarding them, and then going through the process of replacing them if they do not stay. Some of those things can be avoided if we just invest the time on the back end beforehand in the actual hiring process. And some evidence that supports this is the American Non-Dilemma of Racial Inequality Without Racism book. And we've actually attached that there so you can be able to access that and link that as well. Another reality within the sector in this instance for this myth is that when we are posting our job descriptions, the salary is missing. We're not posting, what the salary is, or we might even be fabricating the range. So the salary range itself might be, and I'll just pull this off the top, but let's say it's 70,000 to 80,000, right? But because we might want to lowball someone, maybe we might say it's 65,000, to $80,000, or even 85,000, when we know that we have no intention on offering anyone that $85,000. We want to make sure that we are not putting things on our job descriptions that say commensurate with experience. Because that practice is outdated. In fact, and I know that the center is going to be hosting a talk on this soon, but we've seen how there have been developments in terms of this salary transparency movement, to the effect that there's even laws now that are being enacted that support this idea, this concept of being more transparent with salary. So, and in New York, on December 21st, Governor Kathy Hochul signed New York State's compensation transparency bill into law, making New York the 4th state to enact wage transparency requirements for job postings. And that statewide law, we know that it follows pay transparency trends, and we're already seeing that at the local level, here in New Jersey, and hopefully we'll be able to see it in New Jersey actually become a law, as we've seen it in other states across the country. And I think I'm gonna kick it back over to Vicki, but first we are going to take some time. You're gonna get about 2 minutes to be able to answer the question on your worksheet in regards to that myth. And so the myth is we post our job listings everywhere. The guided question is, how does your organization support the time and cost of network building? Again, be honest with yourself. And even if you don't want to share it out loud, you can always go back and share with your colleagues.
One of the metaphors I just wanted to point out, I want people to think about, we often say you can't pour from an empty cup. Well, you also can't expect people to come out of the woodworks for your organization when you've done no work to get to know them before you need them. So think about what communities you could be doing a better job of connecting with in these next few minutes.
All right. And so I just want to make this one point too, while we're on salary, and although it's not like a formal part of the presentation, we do need to start to rethink what our salaries are. And I know that there are, for some organizations, there are some limitations to what you can actually offer for salaries, right? However, we can't be so rigid in what it is that we're going to offer. So if you know that you cannot offer a higher salary or a salary that is market rate for that particular position, then perhaps you need to redesign what that position looks like. You need to reassess what the requirements are. You also need to give a little. You can't say, oh, I'm only going to pay you this, but you can't work remotely 3 times a week or something. Or you have to work a full 5 days. You can't work a 4-day work week. If you know that you're only offering, let's say $75,000 for a COO salary, don't make that person have to work a full 5 days, because that is not that's not market rate for that position, even if that might be your actual salary cap or constraints. So just be flexible and really think outside of the box, because we're at a very special place right now within the sector where people are moving with their feet, and people are, organizations are losing talent because they're being rigid, or because they're being stuck in their ways. And we don't have to be in, and we don't want you all to be spinning your wheels trying to replace some really great people that if you would have given just a little bit, you could have held on to.
I feel there's so much to unpack there. We could have like a whole conversation.
It really is.
Our office is welcoming of all people. Now, first of all, BIPOC people are not a monolith. Marginalized communities are not a monolith. Tyneisha and I run the nonprofit Professionals of Color Collective. As two BIPOC people, we're always thinking about who are we not welcoming in? Like, how could we be more welcoming to intersectional identities of communities that we're not personally a part of? This is required of all of us to take this examination. So the myth is our office is welcoming of all people, but for some reason, all the BIPOC folks have a really quick turnover rate. The reality is that your culture might be toxic, and you really need to take some time to self-reflect and assess. The actions needed to do that are to conduct an organizational assessment, potentially bringing people in, but really simply just thinking about where are the BIPOC leaders in decision-making, strategic planning, and budgeting within your organization. These toxic environments were highlighted for a lot of people during the pandemic when they were able to work from home. There's a great article that's linked here about a lot of women of color not being ready to go back into workplaces because of the toxic environment. Some of the respondents that were interviewed for the article said it was the first time that I went a whole year without someone touching my hair at work or saying something inappropriate to me at work. I've never felt so productive, and I've never felt so at peace. And the idea of having to go back into the office for many folks caused a lot of anxiety. And that's very telling. This shouldn't be the way people feel about going into work every day. The other thing I want you to think about in terms of toxicity is when BIPOC leaders are brought into your organization. We've all heard probably of the glass ceiling. How about the glass cliff? Oftentimes, BIPOC leaders are brought in when things are at its worst, and they're expected to make magic happen. And when they're not able to make unrealistic magic happen, it's always attributed to them and their skills, not the greater situation or the system that they're working in. So yes, maybe you brought in a BIPOC person to lead your organization, but was it when your organization was already at a time of turmoil? The next piece of this is that we need to check our unconscious bias. Some evidence of this already. We have 100 folks on the call, and people have been chiming in with their guesses about fairy tales. But if you grew up abroad, would you know all of the fairy tales that came up today? This is an unconscious bias that we bring into our space, the way we grew up, the way we were socialized. This one is Goldilocks, because Goldilocks, in her case, it was a completely subjective determination of what was good or bad. And that's the same thing that happens within our organizations, that even though I might feel welcomed and comfortable into a space, I need to recognize that other folks may not. And again, this is when we may need to bring in some third-party professionals to help us to evaluate the culture within our organization. Evaluate the proximity to white organizational culture, which is something that's going to be coming up with a local organization in New Jersey in the next coming weeks. They're in the middle of a series, and Debbie's going to tell you a little bit more about later. If you're not familiar about that later, if you're not familiar with white organizational culture, you really need to dive into it and see how much colonialism has impacted the way we do business. I often think to myself, when I hit a moment of frustration, I remind myself, this is all made up. Someone made all of this up, and yet we hold on to it so tightly, even when it causes damage to people emotionally and physically. The disabled community has been asking, begging for work from home remote opportunities for years, but it wasn't until capitalism really was at stake that we made this big move to working from home. What are the things that we're holding on to that we really need to let go of? Even in terms of what we find professional and how we define what's professional in a workplace. And there's a great article on bias of professionalism and standards linked to white organizational culture here. I'm going to go ahead and hit that 2-minute timer. Tyneisha, do you want to read off what the prompt is?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. So for this prompt, the myth, again, is our office is welcoming of all people. The guided question is, how are you incorporating BIPOC decision-making / power in strategic planning / budgeting?
I feel a little joy every time I hear the little click countdown. I'm going to tackle the next one, and then Ty is going to handle the last one for us. My hands are tied. It's a myth we hear often, but the reality is that change requires us to be intentional, bold, and maybe even uncomfortable to make use of the power that we have. The collective actually started as a pilot program in 2019 as part of the capacity building series at the nonprofit organization I worked in Rutgers, the Institute for Ethical Leadership at the Rutgers Business School. In my role there, I had complete control over the topics that we tackled in our capacity building series. Could I make big sweeping changes within the university? If anybody has ever worked at Rutgers, you know that that's a battle. But I could control the things within my purview. I was able to create space for Tyneisha and I to work together on the pilot for the roundtable, and we were able to focus our whole capacity building series that year on equity issues. And it completely changed the trajectory of the work that I was doing, because I was able to take control of the things I was able to control. Isn't there a little prayer about that or something? So now, all these years later, we have a group of over 800 people. Now, maybe you don't have control over your programming or what the organization focuses on, but are you in charge of bringing in catering for breakfasts every month for the executives? Could you be hiring more BIPOC-led community businesses? Could you be thinking about who gets invited to certain events if you have access to the guest list, encouraging senior staff to think about staff members that maybe are getting overlooked within the organization because you happen to be buddies with one of the VPs. We all have some sphere of power. We just need to think about what we have so that we can leverage it. We need to break through all of this nonsense and bureaucracy. And trust me, I've worked at large institutions and I know what bureaucracy and red tape looks like. Even if you sometimes feel like you don't have power over dollars, maybe you have power over information. And this goes back to sharing a salary, right? Information is power. And so even if it's helping someone to navigate your very tricky organization, that could be really valuable for helping us to break out of the old business as usual practices. I really encourage folks to dive into the ways that bureaucracy, red tape, and business as usual are all tied into white dominant culture and white supremacy culture. And oftentimes, when people hear that, they immediately shut down because what are they thinking of? People in hoods, right? But white dominant culture is so much more than that. It's assuming that people know the fairy tales you know because they must have grown up like you did. It's also about prioritizing things like the bureaucracy as opposed to people and their lived experiences. It's prioritizing things like you must be able to lift 30 pounds in a job description that's excluding a person who is disabled, when that's not really what most executives are having to do. You're telling me there's nothing that's going to help this person be able to lift 30 pounds if it ever became necessary within the job. So really thinking about what are these invisible barriers that we've created, these very real barriers that are really just like invisible and made up. And if anybody guessed this particular fairy tale, it's Rumpelstiltskin, because it's all about tricks and games. And sometimes we need to play those games in ways that benefit communities. We need to think about like what access and power we do have to navigate these very tricky systems and to help people advance. I'm hitting the timer. Give yourselves a few moments. Ty, can you read the prompt, please?
Absolutely. So the myth is my hands are tied, and the guided questions are, what are you continuing to do because it was always done this way? What power do you have?
As tickled as I am about this timer, I don't know. Maybe it's just me. I'm going to pass it over to Tyneisha for myth number 5.
You know I'm tickled pink. All right. Myth 5, I'm an ally. I get it. I've done the work. If any of you know what this fairy tale is that is shown in this picture, feel free to drop it in the chat. All right. So I'm an ally. I get it. I'm totally on your side. I understand what you all are going through. I've been there, and then I commenced to share some of my experiences with you that I feel align with some of the things that you might have felt in the past. Let's just be honest. Those things are not, everyone does have lived experiences, and everyone can, of course, empathize with other folks' lived experiences in the space. But one person's lived experience does not compare to another person's lived experience. Vicki, did anyone guess in the chat? Yes, Emperor's New Clothes, absolutely. And so with the Emperor's New Clothes, if you remember or recall the story, the Emperor felt like he was wearing a great outfit, and in fact, he was really naked. He had no real wherewithal in that situation. And the reality is that BIPOC professionals need active accomplices, even co-conspirators, if you will, when we're doing this work, not silent allies. And the reason why we say this is because there have often been times where BIPOC folks have spoken up about situations, and then they felt the need that they had to retreat, or they felt the need to where they were silenced, or they felt the need to where they could not speak up or feel as comfortable speaking up because they were not supported when they did speak up. And that's by their colleagues, that's by higher level executives. And that happens more often than not. It's happened to me personally. And in that instance, I did feel like I was not necessarily supported, but I had colleagues who would text me afterwards and say, oh, I agree with you, Tyneisha. We need to make this change here, X, Y, and Z. But when they were in that room, or when we were in that meeting, or when we were on that Zoom, they did not speak up. And they were not willing to make themselves uncomfortable or to put themselves on the chopping block, if you will, or put a target on themselves for standing firm in what it was that they believed. And just to be honest, that is not fair to your BIPOC colleagues. In fact, you do them a disservice when you reach out to them after the fact. It is a pain point, if you will, because BIPOC folks do not have the leisure of, one, not speaking up, or two, choosing to, stay silent about certain things because they affect us, they affect our livelihoods. And if we do choose to stay silent about those things, there's an internal struggle that begins to happen that we end up actually having to seek therapy for. And if you talk to some of your BIPOC colleagues, they'll tell you that these are in fact true things. And at the collective, we actually bring in a resident therapist to be able to hold space for our BIPOC folks who are our members. And just some evidence of this, Randall Pinkett, who was a speaker at a couple of our different collective events, and Provost Robinson, Dr. Robinson over at Rutgers Business School. They wrote 2 books actually, Black Faces in White Places and Black Faces in High Places. And they spoke about people with mixed groups of mentors being more successful than those with homogenous mentors. So it's important that we all work to sponsor and advance the careers of BIPOC professionals. And so what do I mean when I say sponsor BIPOC professionals and stakeholders? That means that once you're in the room, that means you are bringing up the names of folks that you know that are doing the work. Even if they're not in the room, you are making other folks aware of them and aware of their work. You are referring them for opportunities that they didn't even apply for. You are really being a champion of them. And so that's one of the things that you can do as an ally, as an accomplice. You can amplify the voices of your BIPOC colleagues and those other stakeholders. And that's more than being a mentor, if you will, because a mentor will meet with you, a mentor will give you advice, a mentor will strategize with you personally, but a sponsor, that's someone you definitely want to have, because a sponsor will go above and beyond and ensure that you are successful by placing your name in spaces before you even get there, by placing your name into the hearts and the minds of the decision makers who hold the power and leveraging the power that they have within the spaces that they've cultivated. And that's really how you could step up for BIPOC professionals in this space. And then the last action really is continuing to do the work. Continue to go to anti-racism training, continue to learn how you can decolonize philanthropy, continue to learn how you can unlearn some of the white organizational constructs that might be preventing folks from growing within your organization. And you just continue to check yourselves. And honestly, it's all folks. It's me, it's Vicki, it's Debbie, it's Danielle, it's Linda. It's all of us within this space. We all have a responsibility to continue to do that work because we all have our own biases. We all have those lenses that affect all of the decision making that we all do. And, we just have to continue to check ourselves and really ask ourselves, what are our motivations in this instance? And I'm going to kick it back over to Vicki for our timer. If you can just get that set up for me, and I'll read off what that guided question is. So I want you all to go back to your do the worksheet. And the guided question is: reflect on your sphere of influence. Who are your mentors, mentees, sponsors? How are you doing the work? Yes, absolutely, Summer. I see Summer's comment in the chat. I want to lift that up. Vicki and I were just talking about how BIPOC folks can also support each other and thinking intersectionally, right? What does that look like? How do we support our other communities? Because there is power in numbers, and we saw that specifically in the ways in which there were different movements that supported the racial uprisings in 2020, and how that was able to really change ways in which we looked at police brutality in this country. We saw other countries supporting us and rallying all across the globe. And so I completely agree with you, Summer.
It's the little things. Like, it's the little things. So just to review what the realities are, in our first scenario, we saw the story of Mulan. And Mulan was about a girl that wasn't an inadequate warrior because she was a female. She was completely capable of being a warrior along with the men in her community, but it was about opportunity. And so that's the reality. Opportunity and access are not the issue. It are the issue, not education. Number two, we saw the story of Cinderella. And in Cinderella, we have the prince that goes all around the, what is it? Domain? Is that the word? Domain. Let's call it domain. Kingdom. Thank you. Looking for his princess. But the princess was right there. His future princess was right there. But he didn't consider her because of the way she presented. So he was only interested in looking at women who he deemed worthy. And in reality of our work, opportunity hoarding keeps our circles tight. We need to put resources into relationship building and not just when we need to hire people. It would be like trying to get married without dating first. And I know there's TV shows for that, but we see how successful it is. Number three, we had the story of Goldilocks, who looks through a very subjective lens to determine what's good or bad. And in our work, toxic culture for historically excluded communities is something that predominantly white folks determine whether it's good or bad for them. And they're missing out on the realities of those experiences for BIPOC individuals. We need to really evaluate our organizations and reflect. Number four, we had the fairy tale of Rumpelstiltskin. Struggling with words, Rumpelstiltskin. I think you know who I'm talking about. I hope you know who I'm talking about. Who used games and tricks to kind of get what he wanted, but he did that within the bounds of the rules that he created, where he'd make deals with people and be very forthcoming and stick with those deals, but at the end of the day, still got what he wanted. And in some ways, we need to use these rules that exist, these barriers that have been put in front of us, and think about how we can navigate them more boldly, more intentionally, and maybe even in uncomfortable places, to use our power to get around these barriers and walls or break them down and start new ones. And finally, our last story about the emperor's new clothes. As Tyneisha said, the emperor thought that he was, pretty hot shit. Like, he was walking around town, but he was naked and everyone knew it. So at the end of the day, we need to check our own egos as we do this work. We need to make sure we're continuing to do the work, that we don't just buy the one invisible wardrobe, that we're continuing to check our style, if you will. And so that we can be the accomplices and the co-conspirators that BIPOC professionals need. Really quickly, most people are probably familiar with microaggressions. Do you know what it's called when someone will come up to you after a meeting like Tyneisha described, or that meeting that happens in the bathroom after the meeting and folks are like, yeah, you were so right about that. And it's like, okay, well, where were you? What are those moments called? Anybody know in the chat? Summer said they're called absolutely frustrating. Okay, they're also called micro approvals, just as bad as microaggressions. If you're not doing it publicly and you're not supporting your colleague, just don't do it. Don't do it. Yes.
And Vicki,
Yeah.
let it also be stated too, to kind of go with number 5, and to kind of go with the Emperor's New Clothes. Just because you attend a train the trainer, if you will, on DEIB or DEIA, that does not then make you an expert or more learned, if you will, than folks who have really been doing this work for a long time. And just because you have a BIPOC professional within your organization, please do not assign them the DEIA work as if they are an expert on DEIA, specifically because they are a person of color. It is demeaning, not only to the person, but also to this industry.
Right. Because perhaps you might learn something about them in a more authentic way because you've offered them a ride. I'm sharing this because I don't drive and I live in New Jersey. I don't drive because I have some challenges, disability, I think. So when I ride with people, we become really, really great friends. I mean, I usually take an Uber, but what I'm saying is that is one way to sort of show up in this space, I think, and really, really authentically support the pipeline of sort of being more inclusive of folks in the space that you're in. That's it. I'm going to go back on mute, I think.
Thanks, Drew. I see Deontay has his hand up. Deontay?
Hey, everybody. Thanks, Vicki and Ty, for leading such a great session. Love y'all. But my question is for both of you and also, anyone who else wants to contribute, particularly and selfishly, as someone who is literally in the BIPOC pipeline. We're talking about a lot of systemic and organizational shifts, I think, from leadership, particularly leadership of non-POC folks. But what do we as the BIPOC professionals who are, actually impacted by some of these systemic changes or systemic challenges, what can we do to kind of better position ourselves and also create change in the midst of it while we're also in the pipeline too, if that makes sense?
I love this question so much. This is a great conversation starter. So I'm going to also open this up to the floor because I think there's a lot of great people in this room that could also add in. And Tyneisha, so the first thing, and Deontay, I think you're already doing it as a member of the collective and the work that you're doing, but finding a support system, a group of people that understand the challenges and the struggles that you're going through and can help you navigate them. In addition to having folks who could help coach and guide you. Most of us don't get access to things like executive coaching, but executive coaching could help us so much in our careers. I'm going to invoke the name of Diane Dean. Diane Dean was the coach for the Institute of Ethical Leadership, for ethical leader. I've been gone 3 months and I'm already forgetting. Institute for Ethical Leadership. And she was a Black woman who deeply believed if your organization, because of bias, because of shortcomings in their budget, if they're not investing in you, you need to invest in you. And so finding out opportunities where you can receive coaching, obviously the collective is one of those places, but that's one way to help you through this process. I'm going to kick it over to Tyneisha and anyone else who'd like to chime in.
And so I would also say, and Deontay, I know that you have a plethora, if you will, of those mentors. I would say BIPOC folks who are in those positions where they're looking to advance their career, sit down with your mentors. I remember when I wanted to take over, not take over, but become a C-suite level executive within the Boys and Girls Club movement, I took my boss out to lunch, and a non-POC person, but I asked him, you know, what do I need to do in order to grow in this space? What areas have you seen in me that need to grow, right? Outside of, you know, your annual review. Because your annual review looks at the job that you have now, not the job that you want, right? So I would say look at folks who are doing that job in order to see what it is that you need to increase on your resume. And then also meet with people and folks who are doing that job in that space, and seek some sponsorships from them too, who can speak your name in rooms when you're not there, so that you get the opportunity to show, even if it's not necessarily delineated on your resume, but we know how awesome you are, that you can, you know, meet those challenges.
We'll take one last one from Peter, and please continue in the chat to support Deontay, and hopefully join us at the collective where you can help support him and his journey even further. Peter?
Yeah, Deontay, thank you for your comment. And I think this is going to piggyback on that, right? We all just need to do a better job of talking to each other and understanding which organizations actually mean it and which don't. And we got to start pushing our BIPOC leaders to those organizations and developing a list. I think, you know, Deontay, one bit of advice I would offer you is I started creating a list of the organizations I wanted to lead in this state. And it just so happens X number of years later, I'm at the #1 organization that was on that list. So I think you got to start really doing that research and stalking. I call it stalking from afar, right? Don't show up at all their events and do that stuff, but really research and read what they're doing and see how that organization progresses over time, to understand which organizations really meet it and which don't.
So true. So true. Well, with that, I'd like to say thank you so much for joining us. And as a reminder, there are no magic beans in this work. It's about planting the seeds, sowing the gardens, and doing the work so that our gardens are blossoming and that we can all live prosperously. I'm going to share our contact information, and the full presentation is available to you as a website. It was shared in the link. You can scroll through and access any of the articles that we mentioned, or find links to the books. And we appreciate you taking the time to be with us today. If you are a BIPOC nonprofit professional, that includes consultants, that includes dedicated volunteers and board members, we hope you'll join us at the collective. Following today's presentation, we'll make sure to share that information out with everyone who said that they were interested. And you could also connect with us here on LinkedIn. Please let me know that you came to the presentation, because I need that reminder sometimes. Ty is much better than I am with that stuff. Thank you so much. I'm going to turn it over to Debbie.
Need to unmute myself. Hi, everybody. I'm just blown away. I think this has been a phenomenal experience, and that's why I put into the chat. I'm going to take this chat. There's so much good information in it, and I'll kind of weed out the thank yous and the I need helps. But I think it's very, very valuable information. As I said, the recording, the breakout rooms were not recorded, and then I forgot to hit the record button, so I missed a little bit of what we did when we got out of the breakouts. But you will be getting that information in a subsequent email. I've put the link in a few times for the presentation, but we'll give that all to you, in an email. This has just been a phenomenal gathering, I have to say. I am really very, very, very overwhelmed myself and can imagine that all of you are too. Let me just give you a little bit more information on the center, and I've got the wrong thing sharing here. Why is that? Hold on just a second. I want to just Well, maybe I will for now. I'll just share a screen too. Okay, so oh, I'm at the wrong place. Here we go. One thing I wanted to mention is we did throw in, Tyneisha went over the stats from the diversity survey. We have a diversity survey that we conducted last year. We have not been able to get it to publish yet. The numbers have changed ever so slightly, except they've gone up a little bit for the boards and the staff overall. But interestingly enough, the data from 2020 was there were fewer CEOs of color in the survey that we did. Now, again, these surveys aren't huge. They aren't, they don't reflect, a total truth, but it's something to be aware of. And the more we can focus on this and the more we can look at these, the more it helps us kind of keep pushing and watching. The data was came from our survey. Our 23 nonprofit trends and outlook survey will be sent out possibly today and certainly by Monday. And we really need everybody. Small, I mean, people say, well, we're just a small little, no. Answer the survey. It may take about 20 minutes or so. It does ask some information about your financial situation, about what happened last year, and then what do you think is going to be coming down the pike this year, and what challenges and things are you facing? That helps us, it informs what we at the center do, but we also share it very widely so that people have data about the nonprofit community. Then we're going to be, oh, I guess what happened to my slide? It's gone. Okay. We do have the 2022 report on our website. And that's the link that we shared earlier. So you can look at what that data is. This one should be released about sometime in early March. Another thing I just want to mention, all the stuff we're talking about has to do with advocacy. Okay, we can't pursue our missions. We can't achieve equity unless we advocate, and that is mostly in the form of education. Okay, but certainly letting people know that they have a voice, and as weak as you think it may be, it's still there and can be used. Finally, the Center for Nonprofits, the New Jersey Center for Nonprofits, is a membership organization. There are certain benefits that our members get. It starts at a $99 membership, annual membership, and goes up from there depending on the budget size of the organization. But keep us in mind. We have been having some very successful every other Monday meetings. Our member Mondays have been growing. And again, we do some problem solving and discussion. And then finally, we have a calendar. We have our own events, but we also have other people's events. Coming up right now, next week, we have Know Your Center, where several of the staff are going to be leading just information about the Center for Nonprofits. If you are a member and want to be reminded of what the benefits are, if you're not a member and want to get some insight into what's included, we'd love to have you join us. Transforming white organizational culture, seeing and being the change, presented by the Center for the Study of White American Culture. Vicki, I think, referred to that earlier. This is part of a 3-part series, and I strongly encourage you to share this. It's certainly not just for white people, but it's important that white people participate. For all of us to learn about how our culture is structured and leading toward becoming a more honestly multicultural community. Finally, we have a fun one coming up called the Vision Board Party. Oh no, shoot! I put February. It's Friday, February 3rd. I'm sorry, it's on our calendar. And this is going to be using a vision board technique that I haven't done it before, and just kind of looking at what do we want this year to look like, what we want to accomplish, and here's a simple way of trying to get that set up for us to keep our vision clear. So that's, I'm going to wrap it up here. I want to thank all of you for being here. This has just been, so incredibly informative. Please do, I want to thank Tyneisha and Vicki. This is just, I know you did a similar program at the conference a year and a half ago, but this has been extraordinary. I'm really, really delighted to have you do this, and I've learned more. So I want to thank all of you. There, as I said, we will be sending a follow-up email with a lot of the resources, and please feel free to share with us at the center with Vicki and Tyneisha any suggestions you have, resources. I've been gathering for the last year. I've been gathering a list of resources. We're trying to figure out how we can make that, searchable on our website. And again, it will be incomplete, but the more we can get, we can gather, the better to help all of us be able to reach more people in our community. So thank you all. This has been fantastic, and we'd love to get feedback. Thank you for your time and attention, and especially Vicki and Tyneisha. This is great.